right now, they want us to surrender, us to surrender. But I could go all night, right here between their crossfire. We'll send them up a message, I'll send a message saying give it up, we've got no place to go, caught up in the rodeo. Oh no, please God, tell me we're dreaming. We've got nowhere to run, they've all got loaded guns. Oh no, please God, tell me we're dreaming. Please God, tell me we're dreaming. Please God, tell me we're dreaming.
Leaks down the soft side of where you left my gold rose crown. You broke down and left me with a chest hum, a black gun, and $40. Chest hum, a black gun, and $40. 2 weeks down and drowned myself in whiskey. Came back round and drowned out and left me with a chest hum, a black gun, and $40. Chest hum, a black gun, and $40. Streetlights talk the same way my mother told me. I walk the same way my father told me. Back straight and chest out, just like a soldier. Back straight and chest out, just like a soldier. Wise men talk the same way my mother told me. I walk the same way my father told me. Back straight and chest out, just like a soldier. Back straight and chest out, just like a soldier.
Feel like a heart to get started when I'm driving, turning every head. Hell, I ain't even trying. Got them raving shades, pretty in pink. Call me old school, but hey, I'm a 90s baby in my 80s Mercedes. I'm a 90s baby in my 80s Mercedes. Pop the top down like a summer dream. She's my teenage time machine. Just keeps getting sweeter with age. She's classic through any decade. The sun's in the sky, glitter on the seats. You can try, but the Benz is hard to beat. So hey, if you want, you can ride with me, ride with me. Feel like a heart to get started when I'm driving, turning every head. Hell, I ain't even trying. Got them raving shades, pretty in pink. Call me old school, but hey, I'm a 90s baby in my 80s Mercedes. I'm a 90s baby in my 80s Mercedes. It's Saturday night, about time to go. Got my white leather jacket and a neon soap. Once I turn on the radio, I'm ready to roll, ready to roll. Feel like a heart to get started when I'm driving, turning every head. Hell, I ain't even trying. Got them raving shades, pretty in pink. Call me old school, but hey, I'm a 90s baby in my 80s Mercedes. I'm a 90s baby in my 80s Mercedes.
Please take your seats. Our program begins momentarily.
Bless my heart, bless my soul. Didn't think I'd make it to 22 years old. There must be someone up above. Say, come on, Brittany, you got to come on now. You got to hold on. Yeah, you got to hold on. So, bless my heart and bless
Please take your seats. Our program begins momentarily.
what I'm gonna do. Well, must be somebody up above. Say, come on, Brittany, you got to come on up. You got to hold on. Yeah, you got to hold on.
Please welcome back to the MTech Digital Stage, MIT Technology Review Senior Editor, Will Knight.
Thank you. All right, welcome back, everyone. Please take your seats as quickly as you can. I'm very pleased to introduce our next guest. So without her, the AI revolution that we're now witnessing quite probably wouldn't have happened when it did. And you've heard several times about something called ImageNet. And so let me put that in context. In the late 2000s, Fei-Fei Li, a professor at Stanford, had the vision, no pun intended, to create a vast data set of labeled images, which became known as ImageNet. And so why was that important? It's important because ImageNet showed that when you feed enough data, huge amounts of data, to very large or deep neural networks, they are able to classify images with astonishing accuracy. This really triggered a revolution in AI, and this is why we're now seeing deep learning applied everywhere. But we hear a lot about like Jeff Hinton and Yann LeCun, but really without Fei-Fei, this would not have happened when it did, and she deserves an enormous amount of credit for that. Also, though, Dr. Li is more than just an accomplished AI researcher. When I first met her, I was honestly struck by how deeply she thinks about the consequences of the work she's doing, more so than I think a lot of AI researchers. And she's really sort of borne that out in what she's been doing recently. In 2017, she founded a nonprofit called AI for All that is dedicated to increasing diversity in AI through education. And recently, having returned to Stanford from leading Google's cloud AI team, she launched a new initiative known as the Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence. And we're going to hear a bit more about that. So without further ado, let's bring Dr. Li to the stage. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Will. Hello, nice to see you. Thank you so much. So I want to actually start because you've been, you were leading the cloud AI project at Google and doing a lot of policy stuff. But I actually want to ask you about your research because I know you're diving back into that. What are you working on? What are you most excited about?
So yes, as you mentioned, my research is in the field of computer vision and machine learning and deep learning. Vision is a branch of AI and visual in animal intelligence. I always like to say that let's just roll back 540 million years ago. We had very simple animals on Earth living in the waters. And then in a very short period of time, about 10 million years, the types of animals just exploded. This is what we call the Big Bang of evolution, and in zoology and evolutionary studies called the Cambrian explosion. Mm-hmm. And what happened during that time? It turned out 540 million years later that we've got the most incredible visual system in the universe that we know, which is the human visual system. And in the field of computer vision and AI research, we wanted to understand, can we enable machines to have that kind of visual intelligence? You open your eye, you see objects, you see the richness of the visual world, you connect it to events, emotion, intention. And that's really what the field of computer vision is about and what my students and I work on.
That's so cool. I love that point because I think if you know human evolution, right, there's also this amazing feedback loop between vision, language, yes, and manipulation, right? And yes, I think we're starting to see, I'm not saying we're experiencing this in the AI world, but it's really interesting how a lot of researchers who work on these different areas. I think the first time I came to talk to you was about language, and it's like you can't have language without vision, right? Yeah. And you're starting to see it with robotics, like you can't maybe have as real intelligence.
Navigation, grasping, manipulation, it all need that perceptual feedback loop.
So give us some projects that you're kind of looking at.
Right. So I'll give you a couple of projects. One is actually language, back to what we started talking about 3 or 4 years ago. We recognized that the richness of vision goes beyond pixels, the ability to tell the story, to ground, connect the pixel world with the language world is critical for humans. So I think now it's 4 years ago, I gave a TED talk that on stage I showed one of the first computer vision algorithms ever that can speak of a story. For example, if if there is an algorithm seeing this room right now, it'll say many people in a meeting room or something like that. But that's a very, very first baby step. And now we're working on understanding beyond objects into the human action relationships, understanding activities. And one of the areas I'm so excited by is the application of area of AI in healthcare, where healthcare is a situation, lots of human activity happens, from patients themselves to clinicians to caretakers, enabling smart sensors with the understanding of human activity. We suddenly find that we have a potential to provide technology that can help the doctors and nurses enhance their job or reduce their some of the repetitive work and help taking care of patients.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like health and medicine is potentially one of these sort of killer apps. That's a terrible phrase to use for AI, because but I think it's also really it's a good way to talk about some of the limits and you know with ImageNet, which is an incredible achievement, you know. But it's actually very simple. It's not like the kind of biological vision, right? You know, you can sometimes accidentally have an algorithm that will recognize, supposedly recognize something because it's recognizing an artifact that might be related to it. Right. And that's a key issue, right, in medicine, right?
Yeah, so first of all, I think, you know, it is no question we recognize the huge progress AI has made in the past 6-7 years. But we are still very nascent. This technology is still very nascent. The whole deep learning, ImageNet-driven kind of technology relies on very big data, very well-labeled data sets, and structure understanding, right? We have 1,000 object classes or you know, 500 whatever clothing we want to recognize. But the world doesn't function that way. The world, you heard from the previous talk by Sergey, the world is very complex, chaotic. There is learning on the go. There is few-shot learning that humans are capable of doing. There is you know, exploration. There's curiosity. So I think it's really important to keep in mind these are the frontiers of AI technology that we are exploring, and if we crack some of these frontiers, it comes back to benefit situations like healthcare, where it's so much more chaotic than structured ImageNet.
Right. And would you also say that in healthcare it's critical for AI researchers to work with professionals, practitioners, because that seems relevant to anywhere you're using AI to me.
I love the fact that you asked this question. So I've been doing AI healthcare research at Stanford, especially with my partner, Professor Arnie Milstein, in the medical school for 7 years. And I spent the first half year just shadowing doctors in all kinds of departments, from ICU to ED to the inpatient units to senior homes. And personally, just last year, because of my mom's health, I spent a lot of time in the ICU. Every time either I work in healthcare as a technologist or a researcher, or I'm in the healthcare system as a family of a patient, the fundamental thing that I recognize and find it really, really important is it's all about human. At the end of the day, no matter what technology we're talking about, has to be human-centered. The humans are patients. The humans are doctors, clinicians, caretakers. And we just have to keep that in mind.
So what does human-centered AI mean for, say, the people here who are in different, something not as obvious as healthcare, right?
Right. So this is work by many of my colleagues at Stanford for the past 2 years. I think it's first, it's the moment we recognize why does Stanford feel we need to start this Human-Centered AI Institute is because AI has entered a fundamentally different chapter of its life. You know, we're the first generation that's seeing AI migrating from labs to the real world. It is making huge impact. It's said fourth industrial revolution, one of the biggest driving force is technologies like AI. But in the meantime, AI, just like any powerful technology, it might have pitfalls. Whether we're talking about bias in our algorithms, or privacy, or security, or labor market, or changes of community and culture, so there's a lot of big questions that is beyond the boundaries of computer science. So Stanford colleagues' leadership recognize that we need to usher ourselves into a new era of AI. This is the era that AI is no longer a computer science discipline. It's a multidisciplinary field that needs to involve social scientists, legal scholars, economists, humanists, historians, philosophers, neuroscientists to join us to really reimagine what AI is. So let me just say 3 principles we founded human-centered AI on. The first principle is, it actually goes with the 3 letters, HAI. So the H principle is we need to devote resources and human capital to understand the human and societal impact of AI. This is so critical, and to in turn make policy recommendations. The A principle is about we see AI as a tremendous technology that would augment, amplify, and enhance humanity, not to replace it. Here we'll focus on technology as well as application areas that will show this kind of augmentation and amplification, like healthcare, education, sustainability, manufacturing. And last but not the least, the I principle is that human-centered, the next chapter of AI technology should be human-inspired and involving brain science, cognitive science, behavior science.
So I mean, those are great principles, but I wonder how are we going to sort of get people to agree on these principles? Like who decides? And I mean, you have different companies. We heard from Harry earlier talking about the ethical principles they have, and it seems like a real challenge to get people to sort of agree on this. Like,
well, so first of all, at Stanford, many of our colleagues agree on these principles. These principles open up opportunities for understanding and finding solutions. It didn't say we believe AI and labor market is this yet, right? These principles open up the opportunity to do more research and have more dialogues, and to convene the thought leaders, the civic society to participate in these dialogues. And I'm very proud at Stanford, we have more than 200 faculty involved in this community, and it's only less than a year old and only formally launched last week.
Yeah.
So it shows that there's so much need and excitement in this.
I mean, I'm sure that those faculty don't agree on everything.
No, faculty never agree on everything.
So I'm wondering, do you think that the sort of the position that AI algorithms take might need to be somewhat flexible? It's not as if we're going to zero in on some ethical norm for AI, and within a boundaries or something like that.
So first of all, Will, I always say that there's no independent machine values. Machine values are human values. So when we say the algorithm's position, we really are looking at the developers, the users, the practitioners, the business decision makers, the consumers. So already, all these groups need to come and participate in that. So every AI algorithm is hopefully eventually used in a particular scenario, whether it's self-driving cars or recommendation system or healthcare diagnostics. For every one of them, we need to get the people who are developing all the way to who will be impacted together to decide what is the value system of that particular application or
So it's an ongoing sort of discussion.
It's absolutely ongoing. And I see it just like how diverse and multidisciplinary AI is. This is going to be diverse.
Right.
There's no, like you said, no one single recipe.
So when we first met, we were talking about where we are in artificial intelligence, and it seems like we've made amazing strides. even since then. But you made a really great point, which has stuck with me, which was you said, by the way, we think we're solving AI, but there's no one really looking very much at social intelligence or emotional intelligence. And we actually saw Harry talking a little bit about some of these devices are using emotional cues, and it strikes me that might be a looming kind of ethical issue. The ability to persuade and to tap into these things, which are very sort of unconscious and very powerful.
So I think you touched on a very good point. So there are two sides to this. First of all, the technology itself, again, is so nascent that it hasn't really even progressed far enough to really know how to grasp things like emotion, intention, and social understanding. Of course, there is some looming research on sentiment analysis, facial expression analysis. But it's far from, we're really, really far.
Right.
On the other hand, whether we're far or not, the technology is going to have a social impact, right? Is going to arouse emotions in certain ways if we put out an image or a document or a video. So that kind of social, emotional, anthropological human impact needs to be studied. And you're right, we haven't seen enough of that yet.
That's interesting. The anthropology of chatbots would be quite interesting. Well, let's talk a bit about so there's been a huge wave of kind of criticism, I think, of what's going on in AI, and I'm interested to your thoughts on this. You say the technology is very powerful and therefore comes with consequences, but do you think that there's this tendency to I'm just curious what you make of the criticism that's been leveled. And so your institute came under, there was a story that was criticizing you for not being diverse enough in the people appointed to there, which is, knowing you, I think that's a pretty sort of strange thing in a way. But so what do you make of the...
So I think it's natural. So there are two things. One is diversity issue. Second is general criticism ranging from bias to privacy. So let's just talk about diversity. I think absolutely this keeps me awake. You know me for many years now. And keep many of my colleagues worldwide awake that we do not have enough diversity and inclusion in this field. And 5 years ago, when me and Olga Rusakovsky started what today we now know as the AI for All organization and project, our key question is, we know AI will change the world. Who will change AI? The people behind AI's development, decision-making, practice will be fundamentally critical to how this technology will impact our society. So at Stanford, we're doing multiple efforts. First of all, there's certain things coming out of the website. First of all, the website is being updated. Today, we're showing 200 faculty. And it by no means reflects the kind of diversity we want eventually to reach, but we're really actively involving a diverse leadership. Of the 20 faculty leadership of HAI, we have 6 women. Again, not enough, but we're trying. Also, AI for All was born out of Stanford, and now Stanford's HAI is actively partnering with AI for All, not to just continue our pipeline program, which is the high school summer camp for women and underrepresented minority. We're also now have a new program to welcome the alums of AI for All back to campus to do summer research. And today, AI for All is at 11 campuses throughout the country. Right. So we also have new faculty billets that we will put way more focus on diversity and inclusion. So we are trying, but first of all, we haven't reached where we are. We really want to invite everybody to try, because this is not an issue Stanford alone can solve. And in terms of other criticism, I think it's important that civil society participate in the dialogue of a critical technology that is this powerful. So whether we're concerned about bias or privacy or labor market, it is important. Eventually, I think all of our concerns and criticism need to translate into solutions and actions. And that's what HAI at Stanford is hoping to focus on.
Yeah, okay. Well, I want to take some questions from the audience, so have a think and raise your hand if you have a question for Feifei. But thinking about the international, sorry, the idea of inclusion, I wanted to talk about the international picture, because obviously this is a technology that's been developed a lot of different places, and we want to, presumably it's important to include people from across the world. So how do you see that picture evolving? It seems challenging internationally these days, and to get everybody to agree and to include people not just from the first world or Asia, but from the rest of the world.
So yes, first of all, most of my life is living in American academia. And one of the blessing of American academia is that it welcomes the brightest young minds throughout the world. So if I look at my lab, my colleagues' at MIT, and throughout American academia in AI, we look at students. I personally have had students from 5 continents of the world, including Africa, so I'm very proud of that. And again, not enough, but this is an international community, and the technology we develop hopefully for the good of humanity, right? If I work a lot in aging seniors. Aging problem by 2030 is going to be one of the biggest problems to United States. But in the meantime, it's a problem in Europe. It's a problem in Japan. It's a problem in China. It's a problem of many of our world. And so when I work with the aging, on the aging project, I don't think about one country versus the other. My colleagues and I think about humanity. Of course, there are other sides of this issue that might involve both in terms of collaboration as well as competition, and I think it's policymakers and thought leaders need to really think thoughtfully about this, and how do we stimulate healthy competition and also, even more importantly, healthy cooperation.
Right, okay. Any questions for Feifei? Raise your... Oh, yeah. Tanya Mishri at the front there. I think there's a mic hopefully going to come to you pretty quick.
Hi, Professor. It's very inspiring to hear you talk, and both about technical stuff, but also your work on just widening the STEM pipeline that you've done. But the question that keeps coming to mind for me is that it's great that we are widening the pipeline, but what are your thoughts on sort of preventing the pipeline from being leaky, dripping out? Women are leaving the field at twice the rate of men. So what can we do to help more of our colleagues who are in that sandwich stage between kids and aging parents? What can we do to support people to stay in the pipeline?
Yeah, wonderful question. And truly, I wish I or anyone have a magic answer, but to recognize this leaky pipeline and the attrition rate is really, really important. I myself, stay up at night thinking about we can't just get the women, get the underrepresented minority, get the rural population, low-income population into AI for All's high school program, and then send them out there. And they're going to go through so many challenges in life. So at least at AI for All, we're very excited that we're creating a lifelong help to any students who have enrolled in AI for All's camps. For example, Stanford is partnering with AI for All to bring the students back, by this time they're in college, into research experiences. We're putting mentorship programs. We have helped them and encouraged them to form that kind of fellowship with each other, and we'll continue to support them through mentorship program, internship opportunities, job opportunities, to keep them going in this. It is, there are many leaders here from industry, from academia. I really, really call for your action to recognize this problem, whether it's for your young assistant professors or software engineer, or this is not a one-point solution in life. You have to start with pipeline, but keep the keep the population healthy, supported, and hopefully together we can solve some of these problems.
That's a great question, thank you. We have time for a couple more. Yeah, one of you, sorry, to the mic runners. Just throw it, I'll catch it.
Okay, I'm Jia Zhang from the Texas Medical Center in Houston. I'm doing medical AI. So one thing you touched but did not get into the depth is the legal consequence for medical AI. So do you have any comments on that?
You mean like the accountability of using an algorithm?
Is it accountability and...
Pretty much everything. So if a machine does the diagnosis, if it's wrong, or does a procedure or something goes wrong, your patient basically is life and death.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I totally hear you. First of all, I'm not a legal scholar, so one of my favorite part of being part of the Stanford High community is that we involve actual legal scholars as well as policymakers in these issues, whether it's self-driving car or medicine or parole decisions. Right. Whenever we use AI, there is human life being touched, right? In medicine, of course, it's life and death, but there's also well-being and family, financial situation, and all that. So I cannot agree more with you that the legal ramification is really critical. We had, when we are launching our HAI Institute last week, we specifically had a talk by 2 law professors at Stanford on this issue. Again, no solutions yet, but the issue of accountability, explainability, and human, how do we design AI to collaborate with human but give human that decision power? All of these are critical.
It's also kind of unclear how courts are going to think about this, right? This is something that society needs to figure out.
So again, I feel very encouraged in the past year, Will, when I was working on Stanford's HAI, is the amount of interest my law school colleagues have in AI. We literally have multiple projects now at Stanford from law school and collaboration with technologists looking at these issues.
Okay, so I think just one more question over there quickly.
I'm Vineet Varma with ExxonMobil, and it ties to the question around confidence in AI, and this is around explainability of AI algorithms. For humans to trust them, we have to make big progress on being able to explain the answer they're coming with.
That's a great comment. I don't think I have much to add other than the fact that as a technologist, explaining AI is one of the biggest technical challenges. And if you are in the tech side of this AI, you probably know there's a huge effort in AI community, whether you read NIPS papers or NeurIPS papers, ICML, CVPR, a lot of work is coming up. And also, I'm also very happy to see federal agencies are starting to support explainable AI research. And this is critical in applications like healthcare, legal decision-making, and all this?
That's a great question. Yeah, it's a big issue. So we talked a lot about the issues. We're kind of out of time. Talked a lot about the challenges. I wanted to maybe give you a chance to talk about what you're most positive about, what you're most excited about, so we don't depress people too much. But yeah, what are you looking forward to?
I'm really looking forward to this new chapter of AI. I think time has come that AI has come of age, transferring from niche laboratory field of a bunch of geeky technologists, mostly at the beginning it was mostly electrical engineers, but now mostly computer scientists, into a very interdisciplinary field where humanists and social scientists and all thoughts of, all diverse thoughts can come and contribute and guide it. And I think that will give us hope to harness this technology for the positive impact for human life. And that's what I'm really excited about.
Okay, great. Well, that's very inspiring. Please give Feifei a big round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. We're going to continue looking at the human impact of AI now, and I'd like to invite my colleague, Karen Howe, to introduce the next series of speakers. Karen, come on up.
Thank you, Will, and thank you, Dr. Lee, for the wonderful framing for our next session. So we've touched a little bit on the developments that we've seen in AI this past year, and also hinted at some of the responsibilities that have come with these developments. In our next session, we're going to translate some of those ideas into actions for how we are actually going to mitigate the negative impacts of AI, as well as amplify its benefits. So our next three speakers will walk us through some of the challenges and solutions for doing so. And first up, we'll have Rediet Abebe. She'll break down for us how and why we need to build interdisciplinary teams for developing AI. In her own work as a computer science researcher at Cornell University, she works with experts from a variety of different disciplines to use algorithms and computation to empower historically marginalized and underserved communities. Please welcome Rediet to the stage.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks. Do not.
Do we have a clicker for Rediet? Perfect.
All right,
there you go.
Awesome, thank you. Let's just try this. It's not working. Is it working? It's not working. Sorry. No problem.
All right.
All right, okay, one more time. All right. Oh no. Okay, well, we're gonna start here, okay? How's everyone doing? Good? Awesome, great. This is a great crowd. Thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me to speak. It's really exciting for me to be here in this completely packed room, and I see many different faces, a lot of new faces, so I'm hoping to get a chance to talk to you all after this talk as well. So as Karen mentioned, I'm a computer science researcher at Cornell University. I'm one of the co-founders of the Black in AI initiative, which you may have heard about. If you haven't, go to blackinai.org and you can learn a little bit more. But perhaps that's a little bit misleading, because today I'm going to talk to you a lot about actually social sciences. And hopefully you can see that as a sign that a lot of the exciting developments in algorithms and AI are actually happening at the interface of AI and other disciplines, including the social sciences and the humanities. So if you, like me, are like a secret social scientist at heart, then this is the talk for you. If you don't like the social sciences, then I don't know. Go on Twitter, I don't know. So great. So I don't need to tell to this crowd that algorithmic and AI-driven solutions are embedded in every aspect of our lives. We've talked about how they're used in lending decisions, in housing applications, in interactions we might have with the criminal justice system, and so on and so forth, right? And we've talked extensively about this. We've also talked about a disconnect that exists between researchers and practitioners in algorithms and AI and communities that might be impacted by the solutions that they might introduce. And this disconnect manifests itself in one of two ways. The first is the issue of algorithmic bias, right? There's a problem that if communities that are impacted by these solutions are not properly informed and properly integrated into this decision-making system, then we might cause unintended harm by deploying solutions that don't adequately take into account historical discrimination. So that's one problem, and we've talked a lot about it. And then the second one is that there are many missed opportunities. That is, there are communities of individuals that are already marginalized and disadvantaged, and a lot of the techniques that we're developing and a lot of the solutions that we're putting out there are not properly informed by the daily experiences of these marginalized communities. And so these marginalized communities are further being underserved by technological advances if a set of researchers in AI are not working in conjunction with a diverse set of stakeholders. So today I'm going to focus on the second problem of missed opportunities. And I'll talk about how we can identify these, as well as how we can leverage a diversity of expertise in order to bridge these missing holes or gaps that we might identify. But first, we're going to take a short detour, and we'll talk about poverty, which is a social phenomena that impacts communities across the world. And even in the US, it's known that something like 1/6 of all individuals are impacted by poverty or living in poverty currently. And about twice as many individuals are living right near this poverty threshold and might fall into poverty at any point, right? And a fundamental question here is we have scarce resources that are available. It could be low-income housing resources. It could be opportunities to education. It could be subsidy programs, whatever it is. We have these scarce resources. How do we allocate them in such a way that, that we're trying to impact as many lives as possible positively? But an even more fundamental question is, what is poverty? How do we measure it? How do we measure economic welfare of individuals? And as it turns out, this is a problem that social scientists have been thinking quite critically about. It's a well-known problem. This issue of being able to measure economic welfare is a well-known problem in the social sciences and economics and sociology, which you might know about if you've taken inequality courses as an undergraduate or graduate student. And the insight here is that economic welfare is very dynamic and very complex, and so it makes it very difficult to measure what it means to say that someone's experiencing economic hardship. And so what happens a lot of times is that a lot of assistance programs, like if you're looking at SNAP or Medicaid or any other government assistance programs, they often just use very simple measures of welfare. They just say, what income do you have? And we're just going to use that as a measure of how well you might be doing. But at the same time, there's a growing body of literature, both in the social sciences, but also by nonprofit organizations like the Robin Hood Foundation or Pew Charitable Trust, that shows that these income-only measures don't accurately capture the disadvantage, the economic disadvantage that families are facing. So there's a lot of work. I'm highlighting just one called the Poverty Tracker by the Robin Hood Foundation and Columbia University, but there's a lot of work that shows that there are many, many different things that matter, and yet we don't know how to properly incorporate them into measurements of economic welfare. And as it turns out, this kind of question is precisely one that could use a diversity of expertise. Because what you have here is you have organizations, let's say non-government organizations, that are working directly with communities that are potentially experiencing economic distress. You have social scientists that have been thinking about economic inequality and economic welfare for longer than I've been alive. And you also have potentially large data sources that you can use to gain further insight into social processes. And maybe even at its core, you might have an optimization problem that you can solve, or an algorithm design problem that you can solve, where you can say, we have these limited resources. How do we allocate them such that we're not missing families that are economically disadvantaged that we might not capture if we were using these sort of more simplistic measures like income-only measures? And this was one of the questions that attracted the attention of what was then a very small research group that you see pictured here back in the fall of 2016. So this is the Mechanism Design for Social Good, or MD4SG, reading group that I co-founded with Kira Goldner at the University of Washington. So we used to meet online, once every 2 weeks, and we would read papers together, and we would sort of explore different directions where we think that algorithmic and AI insights in conjunction with the social sciences can be used to improve access to opportunity for marginalized and underserved communities. And this research group was, we had economists, we had operations researchers, we had computer scientists, public health, global health, all these different disciplines that we've been mentioning. And we were interested in just pulling together these different techniques that we've developed from these various disciplines and trying to pose and address questions that might not be possible to ask using just one discipline. And one of the questions that we were interested in was precisely this question of how do you incorporate dimensions of economic welfare that we know to matter into models of economic welfare, and how do we then use that to allocate resources in such a way that we're not missing any families that might be experiencing economic distress. And this was precisely one of the questions that I explored with John Kleinberg, who's my advisor at Cornell University, and Matt Weinberg, who's at Princeton University. And we have one work that incorporates income shocks, such as in the form of, let's say, if you miss your paycheck, it comes in late, or maybe you have an unexpected bill, such as, let's say you got a parking ticket, which I'm guessing some people here may have experienced. We know that these income shocks are things that impact families differentially, and yet they haven't been incorporated into measurements of economic welfare. And so we asked this sort of modeling question of how do we incorporate that? And then we asked, using that model, how do we then allocate, let's say, government subsidy allocations to families? And through this, what we've been able to find was that we're able to identify economically distressed families that you would not identify if you were using only income-only measures. So there might be some families that are experiencing a lot of income shocks, but if you're just looking at their income, they look like they're doing reasonably okay, but they're actually not, because they might be very susceptible to shocks. And so we were able to show that we can better capture economic welfare. And then we were also able to use these insights to allocate resources in a more efficient manner that can be useful in settings like allocating low-income housing resources. And this is just one question of many questions that have emerged from this reading group. And to be quite honest, a reading group is no longer an accurate representation of what this group is. It's now hundreds and hundreds of researchers and practitioners from across many disciplines that have been meeting through various forums, including a colloquium series, a working group series, many working group series, actually, a research group, and an annual workshop. And I've been co-organizing this with Kira Goldner, who I mentioned to you, and also Irene Lowe, just here at Stanford, who's also doing interesting work in this space. And we have domain-specific working groups that are exploring topics of the form that I mentioned to you earlier. We have ones on online labor markets, on developing nations, on healthcare, and so on. And actually, just before coming down here, I just got off a call in the inequality working group, where we're exploring questions like, how do you mitigate inequality in algorithmic platforms such as recommender systems? And in addition to these working groups, we've also been highlighting exemplary work in the community. So we've been highlighting previous success stories, such as work by Nobel laureate Professor Al Roth, who's done seminal work in allocation of public schools, or assigning students to public schools, but also kidney exchange. We've also been highlighting exemplary emerging directions, such as the work of Professor Tewana Dillahunt, who talked to us about designing and envisioning digital tools for low-resource job seekers, and many other colloquia. And here's potentially, the most surprising part of this is all this activity that I mentioned to you happens online. We've all just been meeting online. This is a group of researchers and practitioners scattered all over the world. Scheduling is a little bit difficult because time zones are a little bit difficult. But once a year, we get to come together at an annual workshop. And this picture was taken at the very first workshop. So once a year, we come together at an annual workshop, and we share a lot of interesting directions and emerging directions that we can use to sort of leverage the diversity of insights from the community to improve access to opportunity for marginalized communities. So the third workshop will be happening this summer. We're going to be having folks from NGOs, from various municipalities, from startups, from industry, but also researchers from across many disciplines to explore these exciting directions that I've been mentioning to you. And through this MD4SG community, what we've identified is that there are sort of three legs to this stool of improving access to opportunity for marginalized communities. The first is that we want to have adequate representation of communities that are being impacted by these tools. We need them to be present and tell us exactly what issues they're facing and how the techniques or tools that we put out there might be not adequately addressing their needs. We need insights from domain experts, including from the social sciences and the humanities, to share insights that they've been building in their disciplines and work in collaboration with other members of the community. And of course, if we're using algorithms for social good, we also need researchers in algorithms and AI to be present and engage deeply with these other endpoints that I've mentioned as well. And so these missed opportunities that I mentioned at the very beginning to use AI for social good, These happen when we're missing one or more of these perspectives. If we just have algorithms researchers going out there to try to, allocate low-income housing for social good without consulting communities that are being impacted, without consulting social scientists who've been thinking about this, then you're going to have unintended consequences that might harm communities. And so these are sort of the three legs that we think matter in the MD4SG community. And I encourage you to go on our website, md4sg.com, if you want to learn more about various activities, and also find me after this to chat more if you want to share your ideas as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rediet. If you would like to take a seat.
Oh,
yes.
I'm not
we have.
All right.
We have just a couple questions for you. The first is, I really loved your talk about actually applying AI to different fields, because that is exactly why AI is so beneficial, is its ability to, for lack of a better word, supercharge some of the social solving some of the social problems we see in other places. And I was really curious how you became invested in applying, from the technical world, applying your work to these social problems.
That's a really good question. So I was born and raised in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and I was always interested in math. I knew that I wanted to be a mathematician growing up, and I even started graduate school in a math program. And what happened was that, throughout my undergraduate career and also during my master's degree, at the same time, I would be doing math problems and trying to do math research, but at the same time, I would be attending public school committee meetings and city council meetings because I was interested in learning about social economic inequality in the cities that I was living in. And so I always felt like I had to choose between these two, that I either had to pick whether I wanted to be a mathematician or continue to kind of do to do the kind of work that would impact inequality. And it was only, during my master's year that I discovered that if you're a computer scientist, you actually don't have to choose. It's kind of like a cheat solution, right? You can actually say, I'm a computer scientist, I have these set of techniques that I'm excited about, but it's a fundamentally outward-facing field. And so I'm going to use that as an opportunity to work closely and learn from domain experts from many different disciplines, and also engage deeply with communities, actually show up to city council meetings and ask, what is the city of Cambridge up to and what are they dealing with? And that can be part of our job. And so that's how I got interested in this.
I really love that. I empathize a lot with wanting to be at the intersection of humanities and technology and trying to figure out how to actually place yourself. So for the audience here, what is a concrete step that they can start taking to forge these interdisciplinary collaborations?
Very good question. So I would recommend just getting uncomfortable and going out there and maybe attending a talk that you wouldn't normally attend. Actually, a lot of the work that I've been able to talk to you about, I can sort of pin back to a time when I attended like an inequality talk in the sociology department at Cornell, where I felt like the dumbest person in the room because I was like, you guys are talking about things that I don't know about, right? But it was good. It was good that I showed up. It was good that I was uncomfortable. It was good that, I was learning about all these intricate things that the community has been working on for decades and decades, right? So I would say, if something seems interesting to you, go learn about the perspectives of other communities that have been working on it, and that might lead to, a reading group that becomes a research community. So.
Thank you so much, Rediet. This is all the time we have for now, but we'll continue the discussion at the end of this session. Thank you. You can take it off. So one of the things that we've already touched on is the challenge of talking about AI ethics is the slippery nature of the word ethics. Different cultures have different ethics, so who gets to decide what it means to be ethical? Our next speaker is here to share with us a more universal framework for holding AI accountable. Mark Ladanero is a human rights and policy expert currently serving as the research lead for human rights at the Data and Society Institute in New York. Please welcome Mark to the stage.
Thanks so much, Karen. And it's really great to be here with you in this room today. As Karen said, I'm with Data and Society. We are a nonprofit and independent research institute based in New York, focused on the social and cultural issues arising from data-centric and automated technologies. So I'm a social scientist, and we've heard a little bit about, including social scientists into these AI discussions, and I'm working on AI governance and policy. And in a report we published just a few months ago, I put forward a proposition. that in order for AI to truly benefit the common good, at the very least, its design and deployment should avoid harms to fundamental human values, which begs the question, what are those values? Now, I would say that human rights, international human rights, provides a robust and global formulation of those values. Now, these values include human dignity and what has become known as human rights law. And this is sort of based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was created 70 years ago in the aftermath and devastation of the world wars. These rights include protecting the right to privacy that we know a lot about in this room, but also protecting freedom of expression, freedom of association, political participation, equality, the right to work, and the protection against discrimination. So what I've been doing is exploring how this human rights framework can help identify and anticipate some of the worst social harms that AI or any technology might bring, and guide those who are developing AI into technical and policy solutions and safeguards to promote the positive uses. And companies are really starting to realize the importance of human rights. And so Microsoft has had a human rights team that has been around for quite a number of years. So has Google. Intel has a human rights officer in place. Oath does. Twitter just hired their human rights person. And Facebook is still on the lookout for their human rights lead, if anyone here wants a job. Other industries have had human rights compliance for a number of years, so it's not really new. But with AI and any emerging technology, it's not enough just to have the staff in place. They need to be gauged in the new challenges that are in the context that are arising around these emerging AI technologies. Now, human rights is especially important for the tech for good space, because it is here where we see technologies actively intervening in the world's most seemingly intractable problems. And oftentimes, this involves the most vulnerable people in our society. And now to illustrate some of these challenges, I'll choose this one topic which I've been working on for quite a number of years, which is on refugees and forced displacement. And last year, according to the UN Human Rights Agency, we have seen a record of 68.5 million people in the world today who are displaced. Displaced because of war, famine, hunger, and other types of issues. Now, with an issue of this magnitude, it's certainly no surprise that technologists want to do something to help and to intervene. Here, on this slide, we see that IBM has claimed that their classification algorithm can predict whether an individual is worthy of care, is a refugee, or is a threat to national security. Recently, researchers at Stanford have created a machine learning algorithm to try to classify and determine which countries to best place refugees. And I was going to apologize, actually, for the next slide for bringing up the B word in an AI conference, but that was already done in the last panel, so I don't have to apologize anymore. But I bring this up only insofar as situating this AI for good initiatives within a broader context of using technologies to tackle really hard issues like identity. And so I'm also coming out with a new report next month on digital identity. And we're seeing a huge wave of experimental technologies like biometrics, iris scanners that are being deployed in the refugee sector and beyond. I use the word experimental intentionally because oftentimes these deployments, however well-intentioned, are untested. And oftentimes these projects are undertaken without proper oversight or accountability. And this is where a human rights framework can help you, can help us. It focuses our attention on the human rights impact on these vulnerable populations. And what we do know is that these technologies will disproportionately impact those in need and vulnerable. And so there are higher stakes when it comes to AI for good amongst vulnerable populations like refugees. But what exactly are these stakes? How do we know, how do we measure the risks, benefits, and harms? And I would argue that we can only determine these, the answers to these questions by understanding the deep social context. So what Radayat was talking about was it was absolutely, I mean, it was amazing, and it was absolutely correct. But understanding the social context by which you are intervening. And it's important to do that before developing, before deploying these technologies. So in the refugee context, this might mean going to a refugee camp like this one, where my team and I, who included partners from the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative and Leiden University in the Netherlands, we spent 3 weeks in this refugee camp, which is to the north of Athens in Greece. It was a Syrian refugee camp where we conducted a survey to try to understand what are the technological dimensions there. And what we found through this survey is that 94% of men own mobile phones, compared to 67% of women. Now, these gender differences make a big difference if what you're trying to do is design an AI project which runs on a mobile platform, when you realize that you might not be communicating directly with or collecting data from women, and now you understand that they need to borrow the mobile phone from the head of household, the man, in order to communicate. Or consider this refugee camp near the Italian border where I took this picture last summer, where what you'll notice here, this is an entrance to a camp, which is run by an international aid organization, but you'll see the police, or a police vehicle. What this represents is that in order to get into this camp, to receive shelter, medicine, and food, the refugees have to submit to a biometric scanner. Why might this be a problem? Again, it's really about understanding the social context. And so in this current political moment that we're living in, or that the Italians are living in specifically, the Italian government has there is an Italian government which has ascended into power, which is actively hostile to refugees. They have stated policy that they want to send the refugees back, that they are pushing refugees back to the lands that they're fleeing conflict and violence. And we saw how the refugees actively avoided this particular camp and shelter for fear that the police would do just that. And in this report on digital identity for next month, we showed that these technologies, which are designed to help, to say, place refugees, can just as easily be used to track, surveil, discriminate, and stigmatize against the populations that technologists are actually trying to help. And so here, where we could ask the question, what is the cost of getting it wrong? And it's something that Megan Price and Patrick Ball have been asking at the Human Rights Data Analysis Group. Sure, machine learning, classification, algorithms might help. But it really depends, as we've talked already about today, the quality of the training data, ground truth, accurate models. And we know we're still trying to get that right. We're trying to get those models to be fair and accountable. But getting it wrong in the specific context of refugees could mean classifying an individual falsely into one category or another, which could drastically alter their life path. It can mean the difference from getting access to shelter, a border, food, medicine, education. It could lead to separation from parents and result in physical and psychological harm. And I'll just end by saying that it is here where the human rights lens and governance framework can help direct our attention on what could go wrong and to mitigate against an important class of harms that might arise from AI deployments, however well-intentioned, and protect the rights of people who need it the most.
Thank you so much, Mark. So I had no idea that these really large tech companies all have human rights officers.
They do.
But that hasn't really prevented them from getting mired in these controversies around using this technology in ways that might be undermining human rights. So what exactly is happening? They have these positions in place, but it's still not really doing much for them.
It's an interesting question. And it's a hard one, because what I think these officers are doing, well, first of all, they're trying to sell a human rights framework up their chain of within their organizations to get people to really think seriously about them. But in the best case, and by the way, there hasn't been that much application for human rights in the AI space. But what I think companies could do, companies in this room, can think about the process of thinking about human rights. So one way to do that is through human rights impact assessments. And so we've heard a lot about impact assessments in the last year or so, algorithmic impact assessments, checklists, different types of processes to try to get to better decision-making around AI deployment. And I would say that bringing into view a human rights impact assessment with regard to the early stage development and certainly the deployment, and then sort of the post-deployment of certain technologies in different markets, it would be essential.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what are some of the open-ended questions in ethical AI development that a human rights framework actually can't solve?
Well, it is fair to wonder whether a document, so the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that was 70 years ago, there have been two major international conventions that have to deal with human rights that have been adopted by countries and governments and constitutions and such. But it does make us wonder whether the fast, dynamic field of AI could sort of be wedged into this 70-year-old framework. And I think that is a very important question. Understanding where the sort of human rights framework gives us a lot of value, and then where, from the trolley problem and beyond, we're going to really have to understand what kind of an ethical framework is for dealing with these problems, which we don't even know what the potential risks and harms are going to be. I would say that, and I think Feifei mentioned this before, which is very encouraging, which is sort of competition in the AI space. And I think, obviously it's okay for companies to compete in the marketplace around AI technologies. What I think would be, and if there was a call to action, what I think would be, what really deserves our cooperation is the sharing and openness around the processes of ethics, the processes to get technologies to be human rights compliant. And sharing those in an open way could really do what I think we're trying to do, which is really and truly build AI for good.
Yeah. From your world in the human rights space, do you feel like there has been good momentum? Like, what makes you optimistic that we're moving in the right direction?
I think last year a number of different sort of outfits and academic centers from Harvard and the Berkman Center and others have really been putting out reports. So don't just read my report. There's a number of other excellent
reports. But do read his report.
Read my report. That sort of is arguing why human rights could be valuable for those who are interested in applying responsible AI. And I think the responsible AI conversation is really ramping up. And I think a number of these institutions, but also governments, who, by the way, have obligations to uphold human rights, again, in their laws and constitutions and through international treaties and such, are thinking through how human rights can be integrated into their sort of national policies. And I would direct you specifically to Canada and France, who have incorporated a human rights-based approach into their national policies. And I would encourage you to look at other companies who are leading in the sort of human rights and AI space as well.
What are those companies?
The kind of the ones that I mentioned already.
Yeah.
Sort of the Microsofts of the world and those.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Okay,
that's all the time we have for now. So we're now going to continue the human rights discussion with Sam Gregory, the program director for the nonprofit organization Witness. Sam is going to focus in on a particular threat we're now facing from the remarkable ability of algorithms to forge our news articles and our digital media. Please welcome Sam to the stage.
Hi, everyone. Let me start by giving you a little bit of context on Witness. We're a human rights network centered on the power of video and technology as a tool for transparency and accountability. My colleagues, who are human rights activists and technologists, work around the globe in a whole range of situations. And we do a few things. We're a key player in providing support to millions of people who try to use this explosion of mobile, social technology, and the internet ethically and persuasively to share their ground truth realities and push for change. And we also advocate extensively to tech companies to reduce the harms from their tools when they're used in high public interest, high-risk environments. And we, of course, engage on emerging technology challenges, particularly on how our AI intersects with rising trends of misinformation, authoritarianism, and media manipulation. I'm also co-chair of a working group established at the Partnership on AI last year, focused on AI and the media and public discourse. So at Witness, we know the power of video when it's used for good. It's in the work of courageous activists documenting things like this on the ground in Rio de Janeiro, in Syria, in Burma, and on the US border. And we also know that it's that power which is one of the reasons why authoritarians and perpetrators of rights violations call fake news on images and videos they don't like. They fear it. This is not new or limited to the US. This is a refrain that human rights defenders I know have heard for many years from governments worldwide who dislike what they say. And of course, I'm very familiar with the negative side of tech, as we've seen it in the past few years, from images circulated to spark communal violence, to harms at scale caused by platform management in places like Burma. So I'm acutely conscious that we live in a flawed real world, and one where harmful consequences can be expected and should be expected from technology developments. So I'm going to talk about AI and synthetic media, but these questions are equally relevant to responsibility in some of the other areas of AI that, of course, we've been talking about this morning. How do we anticipate harms, include the communities who are most likely to be harmed by those advances? How do we do research and create products responsibly? And how do we ground all of this in human rights principles? So where are we at with deepfakes, right? We've touched on it a number of times today. Despite the sort of techno-apocalyptic rhetoric, we're before the big storm. There are serious concerns that we see around use at scale in non-consensual sexual imagery and some initial attacks on journalists. Yet we have not seen other potential malicious usages. As a first step in this area, as in some areas of AI discussion, we need to de-escalate the rhetoric. Now, why is that? First, it's not clear that we're in a rupture moment, not an evolution. I'll come back to that. And second, our escalation promotes the very harm we're trying to avoid. The weaponization of the idea that seeing is no longer believing, which in most cases is simply untrue, sorry, Harry, is a boon to authoritarians and totalitarians worldwide. And we have time to come up with reasoned responses, not to panic. We're in that calm before the storm. Because malicious synthetic media are not yet widespread in usage, tools are not yet mobile, and they haven't been productized. This is a timely opportunity to be seized. We can prepare, not panic. We can include the right people in the conversation and make it a global discussion, with a particular focus on high-risk users, high public interest content, and how we defend key human rights values like free speech and privacy. So what are we talking about when we talk about deepfakes? What are the technical possibilities in this area? A reminder first that we're not just talking face swaps of Nick Cage, aka deepfakes. It's also the ability to more seamlessly edit within video, to create realistic faces of people who never existed, and do audio and video and movement simulation of real people. And it's all in interplay with other forms of AI-based targeting and circulation. I don't have the time here to exhaustively list out the threats from this, but in threat modeling we've done with journalists, activists, lawyers, platform insiders, these include everything from vastly improved phishing attacks to reputation attacks on journalists to expanded cyberbullying because you no longer need an original humiliating picture. Also is in potential interaction with new strategies that we see all around the world of relentless volume of contradictory media that, combined with computational propaganda and individualized micro-targeting, creates what we might term floods of falsehood. As Hannah Arendt said, this may be the greatest threat in this space. A people that no longer can believe anything cannot make up its own mind. It's deprived not only of its capacity to act, but also of its capacity to think and judge. And with such a people, you can then do what you please. And it relates to how weaponizing the idea that we cannot believe anything gives the powerful plausible deniability, that get-out-of-jail-free card, on any compromising image. So what is the solution set we need for deepfakes and other synthetic media? At Witness, we convened the first expert meeting connecting technologists, industry insiders, researchers, human rights groups, and journalists. And we surveyed over 20 solutions, and I'm going to touch on a couple of them now. And we followed that up with threat modeling workshops and other work to understand how AI researchers, journalists, and people working in the misinformation space perceive the risk, and to connect actors together to identify the right solutions. And within the working group of the Partnership on AI, we've also been extensively exploring this space. For example, asking what people consider useful norms on research and publication, and what preparedness is needed by news organizations. Solutions-wise, to start with, we should build on what exists already. That means we should see this not as a rupture, not as an isolated problem, and not just as an AI problem. We can build on existing expertise in dealing with what we might call shallow fakes and the world of falsehood that exists already. By shallow fakes, I mean the thousands of videos that circulate every day with malicious intent, crafted not with sophisticated AI, but often simply relabeled and recirculated, claiming an event in one place has happened in another. Like this video of a person being burned alive, I'm not showing the video, obviously, that I've seen recycled and reattributed in Ivory Coast, Sudan, Georgia, Kenya, Burma, and beyond, each time inciting violence. If this is a problem with antecedents, whose knowledge and participation do we turn to? First, the expert communities. We need the AI researchers, academics, and technologists focused on development and detection to be talking with the journalists who already spend every day looking for this type of falsehood. Groups like Open Source Investigators, the New York Times Visual Investigations team. And we just did this in DC. We brought together 15 deepfakes researchers with 10 leading journalists to say, what do we need to learn from each other to address this problem? And we need to talk, most importantly, to people who faced extensive shallow fake threats, like these human rights defenders we work with worldwide, to understand, particularly in a global context, what they'd like to see as technical, information, and legislative responses. If you're most worried by videos and audios circulating like digital wildfire in closed messaging apps like WhatsApp, which is probably the case in India, Burma, Brazil, then the approach we take to this is very different from one centered on the Facebook newsfeed and professional journalists. And this is, of course, a Russian doll-like wicked problem that is not just an AI problem or a fake image problem, but also a misinfo problem. So any response to deepfakes needs to recognize that the threats are intimately linked to other misinfo trends and mechanics, from bots and computational propaganda to the attention economy we all live in, to algorithmically driven recommendation engines, to declining public trust in institutions. Next, we need to ask the right questions of the tech infrastructure responses we might build to attack this problem. I talked earlier about the harms that emerge from tech infrastructure choices, for example, on content moderation, when it comes to people who are already marginalized or at great risk. Hate speech in Burma, takedowns of critical human rights video in Syria, inadequate protection from online harassment on platforms. There are two areas of technical responses to deepfakes. One area of response is an approach of proving what is real, exemplified by market-leading tools like TruePic, as well as the tools that Witness and our partners at the Guardian Project have developed, like Proof Mode. These typically combine rich metadata, controlled capture, anti-spoofing tests, and yes, signing to a distributed ledger to enhance trust in authenticity and provenance. Real scale will come if these tools are integrated into consumer platforms. So I'd like to focus on that possibility. It is a good idea to have better context for what we trust. How do we trust images in an age of increased manipulation? Remember those accusations of fake news before. These tools provide more confirmation of image integrity and provenance, but with significant trade-offs. Who's included and excluded? What about anonymity and trust? What about the ratchet effect of technology adoption and who gets excluded?
And do we inadvertently set up a disbelief by default system around images and video so that it will be weaponized against people who are already dismissed by those in power as fake news? Technologies of truth may paradoxically be used against them for delegitimization or to hunt them down. We have a report coming out about the implications of these tools and a world where ticks or it didn't happen, what that it might actually mean if we implemented this solution to an AI-driven problem. So we need participants across the stack, from chip makers to startups to app developers to platforms, to engage in a meaningful dialogue with civil society and journalists globally about the way to do this responsibly and right. Platforms will also be central to the growing development of AI-based approaches to discerning what is fake, such as the Face Forensics++ dataset I show here. These draw on the same GANs and AI approaches used to create fakes to try and detect fakery. Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Twitter, WhatsApp, YouTube, and others will also be pivotal to how deepfakes and synthetic media content is shared. They've also, frankly, been the place where recent responses to disinformation and threats to marginalized groups have been US-centric as well as belated and under-resourced. So we have to be careful. That doesn't inspire optimism in this response. We have to do better. So we need a proactive dialogue on what role we expect of them and how we expect them to inform each other, governments, news organizations, and individual users about deepfakes and synthetic media they detect. And as they design responses, we need them to include from early on communities who've been adversely affected already by similar issues of media manipulation, failures of training data, or algorithmic bias. This does not mean we should ask them to be the censors of deepfakes and synthetic media content. In the AI-driven arms race between forgers and detectors, as platforms choose responses to what they detect, overbroad and indeed AI-led content moderation policies risk creating too many false positives and curtailing free speech and expression. After all, we should of course hope that the vast majority of synthetic media will be delightful fun and that malicious uses will be a small minority. So platforms, search engines, and social media can work out how to share meaningful signals they detect as key stakeholders. And finally, these companies and others in the consumer image production space, like Adobe, also need to be clearer on what they will and won't release as research or commercial products, and on the safeguards they will include to make it easier for others to detect manipulation created with their tools. Because when something is productized, it reaches many, many more people than the current research. So as we prepare for the first wave of malicious synthetic media, face swaps, and deceptive audio, there's a concrete opportunity to be proactive and listening. We can think about how we foreground that for many people this is an evolution, not a radical change in the harms they face. Many times they've been signaling these harms for years without people with tech power paying attention. So any response to AI challenges should build on existing solutions instead of being developed in isolation. And we need to listen to communities and experts who have raised these concerns before, and most importantly, be grounded in the realities of those who have already faced the impact of similar technologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. So I really loved the example you brought up of TruePic, the company that is working on verification technology, because I covered that at the time when they were doing a major launch. And I hadn't thought about the flip side of that kind of verification technology, which is that you enter this world where you really empower people to say, oh, this is fake news if it doesn't have a check. And so it does really go to show how important it is to have these interdisciplinary conversations. And so I was wondering, how can other people join in on these conversations? Because I know that you are currently doing that with Partnership on AI, but for other people who aren't necessarily privy to those levels of conversations, how can they begin having them within their companies, within their research labs?
Yeah. So we've been trying to model out a set of ways to be proactive, and we see there's kind of an opportunity right here, a window of opportunity. It's unusual that we're before a crisis and able to be thoughtful, particularly in the space of misinformation, where it feels like the crisis keep hitting us in the face. So we've been saying there's about 4 areas that people should invest in. One is really invest in this connective tissue between experts and communities and the AI community. So we've really focused on that with the journalism, the open source intelligence community, and deepfakes researchers. And I think everyone here can be doing that smartly. The second is we've been saying really focus on preparedness. How are you going to deal with it when we have the misinformation event, for example, in this space that is really going to throw people off. Maybe it's on the eve of the 2020 US elections. What are we going to do when that happens? And that's a plan that needs to be made jointly. So in our case, we're looking at it in the context of news organizations, platforms, the partnership on AI. And then the third thing we can do is really to think, how do we advocate for smart policies that don't overjump? You know, I think we're still waiting to see where this will go legislatively. And there are some spaces we can really protect, like the question of non-consensual sexual images. But on other spaces, we should be looking to see how this evolves and how humans react to the problem before we over-legislate.
So you don't think that policy should be leading the charge? It's really about the groundswell of conversations happening from the tech companies and the...
I'd like to see initiatives like the Partnership on AI really proactively coming forward with norms, for example, around research and publication that can be valuable to people. I think there's definitely going to be a role for government legislation around this. I think the analogy around dual-use technologies is very relevant, and we may see that coming.
How would you characterize where we currently are in our preparations for this coming storm?
I think we're doing better than we have been in other places in the misinformation space. That is no great selling point. I would like to see many more companies, many more people in the app environment who are developing tools like TruePick, really saying, what are going to be the immediate impacts of the choices we make in this space? You know, for example, around publication. But also, what are the bigger societal impacts? And that's why I point to this disbelief by distrust implication of the choices we make about responding to this. Because that would actually have a terribly detrimental effect, particularly on the people I care about, if the assumption is you can't trust an image, because we know that that's been the rhetoric they've heard for decades. Don't trust these dissidents, these journalists. They lie. So we've got to be very careful about societal implications of technology choices we make.
Yeah. Thank you, Sam. At this point, I'd like to invite Mark and Rediat to come back on stage to continue the discussion. Will you please join me back? Great. So I loved each of your talks. Thank you so much for being here. And the common theme through all of your talks really is that technology cannot be developed in a vacuum. It has to be developed embedded within the social context. But that's clearly not really the status quo right now. Each of you are bilinguals in the tech world and the human rights, humanities world. Rediat, from the perspective of the technical world, what are the obstacles that you see in other technologists actually engaging in this interdisciplinary collaboration?
Yeah, so there's quite a bit. I think I was going back to she's no longer with us, but what Feifei was mentioning earlier, which is that this is like a new phase of AI, which is an exciting time for, say, junior scholars like myself. But at the same time, what that means is that a lot of people were trained, say, as undergraduates in a different time when we were thinking about AI in a different way, right? And so a lot of universities now, including Cornell, where I'm a student, and also other universities, are starting to think about how would you integrate ethical thinking in computer science bachelor's degrees and other related disciplines, right? But that's still in the works. We're still in the very beginning stages. And so that's kind of interesting, right? I think if you're thinking about, let's say, medicine, ethics in medicine is something that you think about from your freshman year class or something like this, and so it's not new at all. But I think thinking about ethics in AI is not something that people think about their sophomore years of college, right? And so that's one challenge. And I think also speaking from the perspective of someone who's a researcher, I think also the way that we've set up maybe our conferences and how we publish and how things are evaluated is still thinking of AI as a sort of technical-only field. And there are some changes that are happening. There are new conferences like the FATSTAR conference, which you may have heard about, AI Ethics in Society, and many other conferences that are now inherently interdisciplinary, but not every conference is there yet. And so I think there's also challenges there. So those are the two big things that I would point out.
Do you feel like that there's cultural resistance to these kinds of changes?
Yeah, and I mean, that's to be expected, right? I think anytime you're trying to change something drastically, there's going to be some resistance, and maybe rightfully so, because you do want to actually justify why you're changing something before you dramatically, say, transform how you're doing undergraduate education. But I think there's also a huge appetite for it, right? I think if you go, say, to Cornell and talk to undergraduates about what they're excited about, CS for social good is one of the big things that they mention. And so I think universities and institutions are doing their best to respond as quickly and as effectively as they can to these rising demands.
Yeah. What about for you, Mark and Sam, from the human rights world? Do you feel that there's also resistance sometimes or challenges in engaging with the technology world?
I don't know if it's resistance. I think it's really, listen, multidisciplinarity and multi-sector collaboration is really hard.
Yeah.
And we want to do it and invite social scientists or anthropologists and others in the room with but it creates for some uncomfortable moments actually because going to the Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency conference and others, you end up in rooms where only half the people only understand 30% of what's being talked about, and the other half is, another room is going to be another type of, differential. But I think that uncomfortability is extremely important. And getting into rooms, I'm on Sam's PAI working group, and getting different actors together who don't really see things from the same way. You have human rights people, and then you have companies and others sort of all in the same room together could, again, make for some uncomfortable moments. However, with AI, and we've heard already today, it's not just a technical field. It has to do with society and law and culture, and commerce and government. And there is no way we can get this right without this cross collaboration.
Yeah. Sam?
Yeah, I think I'd echo that. I think the question of how this collaboration works is also on whose terms. And I think that happens right now around current crises at the intersection of human rights and tech, and also sort of emerging crises. And I think the frustration that many communities that Witness works with feel is they feel like they have very limited opportunities to influence the agenda. And that often it's through intermediaries like Witness, and we do a good job, but we are not the same as the communities who are directly affected, who are often confronting this in a particular way. So the terms of the engagement are not equal, and we need to equalize that more. I think the second is actually in relation to emerging problems, and it even occurs within my own organization. I'll explain to my colleagues, we're looking at deepfakes, we're really focused on emerging threats from AI, and they'll be like, my God, I'm just dealing with the problems of death threats, of attacks, of these shallow fakes. How do I make time for this? And I think this is both a resourcing question, it's also a, how do we be respectful of the exhaustion and the pressures being placed often on frontline activists and frontline communities to do the work of being in that space. We have to switch the valence here. It needs to be from the tech industry really trying to build the space for them versus kind of this rather, you can make it in if you make it in type space.
Yeah. A question for all of you building off of that is what kind of processes or roles can companies establish to facilitate these kinds of engagements? And I know we already talked a little bit about that, but building on that, is there other more formal ways that companies can really weave this into their DNA?
Yeah, I think, there's obviously, you need a structural element, right? Like a checklist and the principles. My question always on those structural elements is there an option to say no if something is actually going to lead to serious human rights consequences? And in most of them, there doesn't seem to be an option to say no. And then you need to resource that well. And I think that the issue of do we have a human rights director? I'm like, how many human rights people do you have more broadly? Where are they? Are they just in Silicon Valley?
Yeah.
Are they in every country where you work at the same level?
Did you? Go ahead, yeah.
Oh, thanks. I would just add that, as Sam kind of alluded to before, we are at a really special time where we can anticipate potential risks and harms. And so now is really the time for companies and researchers and others to build these very strong connections to civil society, to the different country offices where your products might be launched. Don't just rely on social scientists doing surveys. I mean, engage with the people who are the closest to the issue within those countries. And by building that sort of civil society and private sector kind of alliances now, when something does go wrong, and it will, we could really start to have the foundation for more collaboration, more opportunities for redress and accountability, and maybe sort of knowledge exchange, such that when a technology is just not going to work in the social context, as Sam was saying, we have the ability collectively to just say no.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so I have very limited experience working at companies, but I remember the first time that I visited Facebook in the giant open floor nightmare situation. I remember walking around, it was very eclectic, there's a lot of signs, and I remember thinking, there are more Black Lives Matter signs than Black people. Like I was walking around and this was like very stark for me, and I thought maybe this was a bad day, I've only been here for a day, I really shouldn't be judging this. And I didn't think too much of it. But later, someone who is a Black individual who'd worked at Facebook for quite a bit ended up quitting and writing an article saying explicitly that. And so I thought, I didn't make this up, right? And so I think a lot about how, we are where we are now. We've seen some negative consequences that we didn't intend. And part of it is the fact that we just didn't have a diverse representation of people by demographics, by area of expertise, by all these things that we now know to matter, right? And so in order to get from where we are to a position where we're doing better than what we're doing, the composition of companies needs to look different. And I've seen, I think, a couple of sort of like sticky points. I think it goes back to what Mark was saying about, how do we deal with discomfort, right? If you're at a company and you're saying, okay, we know we need better representation of X, whatever X is, right? It might mean that you have to revisit a couple of things. It might mean that you have to revisit your office culture. It might mean you have to revisit how you hire people, what positions you hire them to, all sorts of things. You may really have to restructure things. And once they're there might be some uncomfortable conversations that you need to have, right? How do you deal with that? And how do you make sure that you're creating an environment where people feel empowered to say, actually, you've been doing this in this way for a while, but it doesn't work, and let me tell you why, and you need to just scrap it, throw it out, start from scratch. You need to set up a situation where people can have those conversations.
I think that's a really great point. It's not just about cosmetic fixes. It's about really changing the culture from the ground up. We have just a tiny bit of time for audience questions, so please have a think about that while I ask my next question. We have the global policy head of Google coming in tomorrow. What is one question you would like to ask him? And while we do that, I will pick out the...
Maybe I would ask... So within Google's AI principles is a one line there which says that Google's AI deployments should be respectful for international human rights. And I would be really interested to understand how they practically are doing that. And I know people who work on that team and they're working hard on it, but it would be great to hear from the policy director.
I'd love to hear 5 things that are concretely going to change about responding to how AI influences the misinformation debate. So how do you learn from what's happened before? What are you going to do differently moving forward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would also add, how do you make sure that underrepresented voices are heard and empowered at Google AI and can challenge some of the things that have been happening?
Yeah. A question over here.
Thank you. I'm Ellie Graydon. I run Talis Analytics. Had a question about, we do a lot of work at the intersection of policy and government with how we use data and computational modeling to then inform those sorts of policy decisions. One of the things that we run into a lot is that we're never working with big data. We're almost always working with small data. We're working with human data. We're having to extract policy data so that then we can cross-analyze it to the larger data coming in from, say, epidemiological modeling and so forth. So my question for all 3 of you, because you're all very much working in this same space, is it's one thing if you have video data, that's a lot of it, or there is a lot of it. So how do we solve the AI problem around small data, especially when we're talking about or underrepresented communities for whom we don't have enough data collected? Yeah. So how have you seen that successfully met so far, and where do you see the opportunity?
I'll put out an example in AI and content moderation, which is an area we work on a lot. which is there you see that the implications of applying AI systems to limited data, right? You don't have a sufficient training set of training data. There's bias within the data. It's dirty data. We could see that in what happened in Burma. The results were terrible of using AI in that context. My response to that was you have to back up from the use of AI in that context when you don't have enough data. I'm speaking from a kind of a human rights perspective, one of real harms, but I think it might extrapolate to other settings. You may need to make a decision not to be doing that.
Yeah.
Did you want to?
Yeah, I can just quickly add also, that's something that I think a lot about actually. So just taking as an example, individuals who are living in Africa, and let's say if you're thinking about health, there's not a lot of data on individuals in Africa, and even basic statistics related to health, it's a huge problem. I don't have the solutions, but I do have some things that have been helpful. One is that thinking creatively about different types of data sources. So we have some work that uses people search data to kind of get at what health information needs they have for individuals living in Africa. And that work was actually like the first work that looked at all 54 nations in Africa using a large web-based data source, and it really shouldn't have been, right? It's 2019. There should have been like previous work that has been doing this. So I think you can think creatively about different data sources. And then a quick point is also that through Black in AI and also other communities that I'm engaged in, I've been surprised to see that there is actually data sources. We're just not connected to the communities that have them. So there's a thriving group of data scientists in many African nations. There's Data Science Africa, there's Deep Learning in Daba, and they have a thriving community, awesome data sources, awesome research questions. They look very different from ones that we would ask here. And so creating those links and trying to patch some of these issues that you mentioned, I think is helpful.
That is unfortunately all the time that we have, but thank you all so much for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. So we're breaking for lunch, but I just have a few housekeeping things to share. During the break, there will be a session in this room hosted by our presenting partner, Intel, and Technology Review CEO and publisher Elizabeth Bramson-Brudeau will be in conversation with Intel's Lama Nachman about how the adoption of AI will improve the human experience and advance our potential. So that session will begin at 1:30. The lunch buffet is set up on the 4th floor. We invite you to enjoy that, and there's seating set up on the terrace as well. And then please join us back here at 2 p.m. for the session. Thank you so much.